Welcome to Unraveling 50 Years of Codestria Legacy. Today, our guest is Governor Peter Anyang Nyong'o. Professor, can you please introduce yourself and tell us about your background in academia and your association with Codestria over the years?
Well, my name is Peter Anyang Nyong'o. I have been a university academic for many years before I joined politics in the second liberation of Kenya. And in that regard, I'm currently governor of Kisumu County, which is one of the 47 counties in Kenya. We have a devolved system of government with one national government, 47 counties, which divide functions between the national government and the counties. The counties perform the functions where the rubber touches the ground. In other words, the functions which concern people most where they live, so like health, basic health, primary health, family health, and so on. But my connection with Codestria goes a long way. When I was a graduate student at the University of Chicago, and I was just leaving Chicago to go and do my field work in Cote d'Ivoire on agriculture and politics in a post-colonial society in Africa. And under a reasonably authoritarian regime, I would say. I knew very little about West Africa on the ground. I mean, generally, yes, I'd been to West Africa, but knowing society, I didn't. But then I knew at that point in time that there was an institute in Dakar called the Institute of Development Economic Planning, a UN institute, headed by Samir Amin. And I read Samir Amin's book, Neo-Colonialism in West Africa, or in French, Afrique de l'Ouest bloquée, which really impressed me about Amin's understanding of West African political economy. So I decided to come to IDEP as a stagiaire or a visiting fellow for some time, initially 3 months. When I got to IDEP, I found that there were two gentlemen, Thandika Mkandawiri and Abdallah Bujura, and another lady called Zen Tedese, who were actually busy founding Codestria with the support of Samir Amin. The argument of Samir was that IDEP was a UN institution. It did not belong to Africa per se, but in order to advance the research and publication in social sciences and to mobilize African social scientists, we needed to establish a different institution. And so out of the initiative of Samir, Zen Tedese, Abdallah Bujura, Thandika Mkandawire, and many, Kadmanata Mills, Funo Chugwa, and so this team of people at IDEP founded Codestria. And I found that in the process of establishing Codestria, my interests were catered for. This was an institution concerned about social science research. I was a political scientist, a social scientist wanting to do social science. So we started working together on the mission and vision of Codestria and the kind of projects and programs that Codestria was developing. And from then on, I've never left the journey with Codestria.
Professor, looking back to the early days, could you share some of your memories and experiences of Dakar in the 70s and how it fostered a vibrant intellectual community?
Dakar was a very different city from Nairobi. Yes, Nairobi had intellectual life, but Dakar had a very vibrant intellectual and cultural life. Remember, the president then was Leopold Sédar Senghor, who was one of the first nationalists in Africa, a poet, a scholar. Leopold Sédar Senghor established an intellectual culture in Dakar, which was phenomenal. And so in Dakar, you walked on the streets, you went to cafes, and the discussions and the openness of the Dakarois, the Dakarois, to the rest of Africa was amazing. So you felt at home in Dakar, especially as an intellectual. So IDEP and Codestria, finding themselves in Dakar, actually found themselves in a very appropriate intellectual and cultural environment to thrive in. Therefore, Sédar Senghor had no passion to control thought, he shared in the production and generation of thought. So intellectual life was very vibrant. You went to the restaurants and people were discussing African issues, Senegalese issues. Senegalese politics was very dynamic as opposed to the rest of Africa, which were increasingly coming under very strong authoritarian regimes. Of course, Senghor, like every first generation African leader, was not totally liberal in all spheres of life. But compared to the rest of Africa, to me I found it very different, qualitatively very different.
Professor, CODESIA has evolved from humble beginnings to a more inclusive and diverse organization today. Can you discuss the importance of this inclusivity, especially with regards to the involvement of women, youth, and the diaspora?
I think the inclusivity is as a result of CODESIA being sensitive to the issues that social scientists should deal with in Africa, and not pursuing social science research in a very traditional manner, in the sense that the individual comes out with a research problem and does research. CODESIA went ahead to define themes that researchers can come together in and do research together. For example, I was a leader of the theme on politics and social movements, which we worked together, a number of African scholars, including Mahmoud Mamdani, Isha Shivji, and so on, and produced this book on popular struggles for democracy in Africa, which was published by Z Press. We were saying that we should not just study political parties. Political parties are important, but there are popular movements of the people, which then morph into political parties, or which then inform the material with which political parties form themselves, or seek to burst the repression that political parties have on African society. So we said, let's discuss this thing country by country. How do popular movements emerge? What kind of struggles do they engage in? What are political results do they have? Do they lead political change or not? What kind of change? So we were concerned about traditional political movements in Africa, from country to country, but also new social movements being organized by elites, by journalists, by literary people, and so on, and how they shape Africa's politics. Yeah.
Professor, CODESIA has been proactive in planning for the future through seminars and meetings. Can you share insights into how these forward-thinking initiatives have shaped the organization's legacy and vision?
A very good question. Bringing people together who have never met before into a conference or a workshop or a working group and throwing a problem for them to discuss is one of the best ways of developing scholarship, because people discover their colleagues who are doing research in the same area, who are asking similar questions from different countries. Not only do they learn about those countries, but also learn about the common problems that face African countries and how scholars are trying to analyze them, understand them, and explain it to the world. Karl Marx once said something very interesting, that philosophers have described the world in various ways. The point, however, is to change it. Social scientists don't want just to describe social processes. They want to find out how, through research, they can help change society. They may not themselves change it, but the production of their knowledge will help some people do their work better in changing society by going beyond appearances into delving into the reality.
Professor, Chapter 4 focuses on the challenges CODESIA faced, including a decline in aid support and shift in the geopolitical climate. Could you describe the impact of these challenges and how CODESIA navigated through these tumultuous times?
CODESIA faced the challenge, one, of standing up to its principles and the objectives for which it was established under very difficult times, and under a time when resources for CODESA to do its work, were not that much, really. CODESA then had to present itself to development partners, UNRITs, other organizations, to get resources to do the work it set for itself. That was not easy. Secondly, CODESA had to sell itself, as it were, to the social science communities from one country to the other. This required travel and meeting people like Tandika Mkandawire, Abdallah Bujra, and so on. They had to travel and meet scholars in various countries. Thirdly, CODESA organized workshops and conferences where people came and discussed social science issues affecting Africa, thereby helping them to develop their own problematic for putting together research groups. So CODESA encouraged African scholars to have working groups, research groups, dealing or doing research and writing on specific issues and themes in Africa. This is how what you see published in Africa Development or the Bulletin has been. In other words, the Bulletin and the CODESA Journal is a source of getting output of African scholars to publish. You see, scholars, one of the things that scholars hold very dearly is to have an outlet for their publications. CODESA established itself as one of those outlets, so that, and the fantastic debates have occurred in both the Bulletin and Africa Development, bring even more closer together a discourse among these African scholars.
Professor, can you reflect how the organization's resilience and the role of key stakeholders and staff in overcoming these challenges? How did this experience shape the future trajectory of CODESA?
I remember particularly when the late Claude Ake was the chairman of CODESA, the executive committee, and there had to be a transition of leadership from Abdallah Bujra to Tandika Mkandawire. One, because Abdallah had served his term, and it's good to renew leadership from one generation to the other. And at that point in time, CODESA was going through a lot of financial problems. So Claude Ake and Abdallah had to travel to Europe, talk to SIDA, Sweden, and whatnot, and all those donor partners to explain where CODESA was and to introduce Tandika as the incoming executive secretary of CODESA, so that the donors who are supporting CODESA could have confidence in the transition. That was not easy. I remember talking to Claude Ake and talking to Tandika particularly, and talking to Abdallah, all of whom are my friends. And the transition was not easy. But CODESA did overcome that transition. And Tandika came in, and Tandika really built CODESA from strength to strength, until by the time he was leaving CODESA for other, and I think Bio came in, it was a very vibrant institution. And Bio did his best, and I think, and he handed over the Godwin. So transitions of leadership in CODESA, to me, after that first phase, when Claude was chair of the council, and when there was the first transition from the founder Abdallah Bujra to Tandika Mkandawire, I think has been pretty smooth. Yeah.
Professor, as a prominent academic or policymaker, can you share your perspective on the need for African governments to invest in organizations like CODESA? What impact could this shift have on the future of Pan-African scholarship and research?
I wish there were African governments who could volunteer to fund without any strings attached the CODESA. It would be very good. But I also wish that there were African foundations like the Dangote Foundation to fund CODESA. I think this is something we should work on. There are foundations, the Hofwood Bonnier Foundation in Cote d'Ivoire. I don't know whether there's a Leopold Sedar Senghor Foundation in Senegal, the Jomo Kenyatta Foundation in Kenya. I don't know what discourse we need to have with these foundations to support social science research. But some of these foundations will tell you that they're much more concerned about research in their own countries than supporting a continental entity. In that regard, the AU is possible, because now I just came from a conference in Dar es Salaam where both the AU Commission and the ECA were commemorating 60 years of the AU in Dar es Salaam. I was a keynote speaker at that meeting before I came here. And you can see that both the EU Commission and the ECA are very open to have discussions about Lycodesia, because what they've seen, scholars have done for them in working on documents for both the EU and the ECA. And this is what I was saying in my keynote address to them. I was telling them that organizations like Codesria and SAPES in Southern Africa and others like that, even the Nigerian Political Science Association, these are very important institutions for research and thinking that the ECA and the AU should collaborate very close. I think it would be easier for us to have a discourse, and I think Codesria should go out of its way to have a mission to the EU, the AU, and also to the ECA and Addis Ababa to discuss this closer collaboration, because they are open to it, the way I saw it in Dar es Salaam when I was just there before I came here. I think African governments should, but whether they will is a different issue. I think this will depend on from one African government to the other. I can see a government led by Thabo Mbeki doing it. I don't know whether government after Thabo Mbeki will continue doing it. Really, it depends on leadership. Now that I look at it, I kind of, there are very scarce, very few leaders in Africa who would have a serious discourse with Codesria, quite honestly. I'm not quite sure, but Thabo Mbeki, I would have thought so. Julius Nyerere, if he was still there, yes, definitely. Somebody like Kwame Nkrumah would have, you know. Present day generation, I can't see. Maybe I don't know them that well, but maybe Morocco. By the way, Morocco is very outlooking. Morocco, from what I've seen in Morocco, they are readier to collaborate with African intellectual institutions than otherwise. But I think Codesria could learn from Union of Cities and Local Government of Africa, UCLGA, based in Morocco in Rabat. I think there should be a meeting between Godwin and Jean-Pierre Longbassi. Jean-Pierre is the Secretary General of UCLGA. Is the Chief Executive of UCLGA. Jean-Pierre is an academic. Jean-Pierre is... so if you have Jean-Pierre, Godwin Morunga, and the ECA and AU meeting, I think it would be productive. Maybe Codesria could initiate a meeting where we get the ECA, UCLGA, Codesria together.
Professor, can you share your thoughts on the future vision for Codesria as you mark its 50 years anniversary? How do you see the organization evolving in the years to come?
I think the organization will more or less follow the path that's already established. I think the path is sound. I think it should continue expanding its constituency in African countries without spreading too thin, because if you can, it has established this tradition of depending on chapters, Codesria chapters in every country, and linking up with the other regional intellectual bodies like Southern African Political Economy Series, and similar organizations in North Africa. I've mentioned we have academic organization in Morocco and Egypt, which are very dynamic. And of course, the Nigerian Political Science Association, I think, is also very dynamic. So I think if CODESIA also have these linkages, it would help reinforce its constituency and its base of support. I mean, what we want to do is to, one, continue the mission and vision of CODESIA, but also expand these alliances, this working together with other. I think the AU and the EC are very important. And I would say that at the regional organization, for example, the East African Community, could, but I think from what I could see in Dar es Salaam, the meeting we had, the ECA and the AU Commission would benefit from a working relation with CODESIA, and CODESIA would too. It would be a mutual kind of benefit for both. Well, my last word is just to congratulate CODESIA for this 50 years journey and wish it another success in the next 50 years. For those who are still young, who will be here 50 years from today to celebrate CODESIA's birthday, I wish you all the best, because I was there when CODESIA was being formed in 73, 74, and I can't believe that we are here today celebrating 50 years. Yeah.
Thank you for watching. Please subscribe and follow us.